Philadelphia doesn't forgive weakness. It swallows it whole. In the city's most dangerous nightclub, a feared mafia boss notices something he hasn't seen in 20 years. A young woman so terrified she can barely breathe. She isn't running from poverty. She isn't running from debt. She's running from something that lives inside this city. Something wearing an expensive suit and a borrowed smile. And the moment Vincent Moreau understands what she's survived, the most powerful criminal in Philadelphia makes a decision that will burn his world to the ground. If you want to know how far this story travels, like, follow, and drop your city in the comments. Let's find out together. The August heat hit Philadelphia like a fist that had been building for weeks and finally stopped holding back. By 10 in the morning, the asphalt on South Broad Street was already soft enough to leave impressions, and the air downtown smelled like exhaust and something vaguely chemical that nobody ever identified, but everyone eventually stopped noticing. Summer in this city was not the kind that invited leisure. It was the kind that wore people down to their essential parts, stripping away whatever cushion they'd managed to build between themselves and the harder edges of their lives. Eclipse didn't open until 9 at night. That was a fact everyone in the city's underworld understood without needing to be told. The way you understood certain intersections belonged to certain crews, or that particular restaurant served as neutral ground, or that the man who owned the club on Arch Street did not, under any circumstances, appreciate unannounced visitors. But the service entrance on the alley side opened at 8 in the morning for deliveries, and the side door that accessed the staff corridor stayed unlocked from 7 onward because the cleaning crew arrived before the deliveries, and the prep cooks arrived before the cleaning crew, and somewhere in that overlap was a 30-minute window where a person could slip inside and sit in the corridor and wait for whoever managed the floor to come in and tell them whether they had a job or not. Avery Quinn had been waiting in that corridor for 40 minutes. She sat on the concrete floor with her back against the cinder block wall because there was no chair, and she'd learned a long time ago that comfort was something you stopped expecting when you needed a job badly enough. The corridor smelled like bleach and old grease and the faint chemical sweetness of industrial cleaning products stored in the supply room 3 doors down. The overhead fluorescent tube buzzed at a frequency just high enough to register in the back teeth. Avery noticed all of it the way she noticed everything, cataloging, assessing, measuring the space between herself and the nearest exit out of a habit so deeply embedded now that she no longer recognized it as fear. She simply called it attention. She was 18 years old and looked, in this particular moment, closer to 25. Her jeans were clean. That had been a deliberate choice. She'd spent 20 minutes the night before scrubbing a stain from the knee under cold water in the bathroom of the shelter on Callow Hill Street, wringing the fabric out and pressing it flat against the radiator until it dried enough to wear. Her shirt was a plain gray button-down she'd found at a donation box near the bus depot, slightly too large in the shoulders, but presentable enough if she kept the sleeves rolled to the elbow. Her hair was dark brown and pulled back tight. She wore no jewelry because she had none. What she did have was a folded piece of paper in her jacket pocket with a name on it. Marcus Webb, floor manager, Eclipse, and the information that he was hiring cleaning staff for the evening rotation, 3 nights a week minimum, cash at the end of each shift. Cash was the requirement. The shelter allowed a 60-day stay, and she was on day 43. She needed money for a deposit on a room, any room, something with a lock on the door. She needed it before day 60. That was the math she lived inside of now, clean and brutal and entirely without sentiment. The door at the end of the corridor opened and a man came through carrying a clipboard. He was maybe 40, heavy-set, wearing a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and an expression that suggested this was already not going the way he'd hoped. He stopped when he saw Avery and looked at her the way people looked at things they hadn't expected to find. Not hostile, just recalibrating. "You the one about the cleaning position?" "Yes." She stood up. "Avery Quinn. We spoke on the phone." "Right." He looked at the clipboard, then back at her. "You got any experience?" "Housekeeping, office buildings, some restaurant work." None of it verifiable, but she delivered it steadily, and he didn't press. "It's 3 nights minimum. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You start at 7, done by midnight. Sometimes later on weekends if there's an event." He paused. "Cash, like I said. But I need someone reliable. I've had 3 people not show up in the last month." "I'll show up." He studied her for a moment in the particular way people sometimes did, trying to read something they couldn't quite name. Then he nodded. "Come take a look at the floor. I'll walk you through what needs doing. The corridor opened into the back of house area, then through a heavy door into the main club space, and Avery followed Marcus Webb across the empty floor without letting her pace change. She took in the room methodically. High ceilings, exposed ductwork painted matte black, a long bar running the east wall with bottle shelves backlit in amber. Round tables on the main floor, leather banquettes along the perimeter, a raised stage at the north end, a DJ booth suspended above it, stairs leading to an upper level she could partially see. More seating up there, more private. The whole space was built to feel simultaneously open and enclosed, which she supposed was intentional. And in the far corner of the upper level, set back from the railing in a booth that commanded a view of the entire floor, a man was sitting. He had not been visible from the corridor entrance. The angle was wrong. He became visible only once she crossed far enough onto the main floor, and by then she had already taken 3 steps into the open space before she registered him. She didn't stop walking. She kept her pace, kept her eyes moving the way Marcus Webb was moving, cataloging the bar setup, and the placement of the cleaning supply stations and the distance between tables. But she'd seen him, and the scene had registered somewhere in her body below conscious thought. A slight adjustment in her breathing, a fractional increase in her awareness of the exits she'd already noted. The man in the booth was watching the floor. Not her specifically, just watching, the way a person watches a space they know belongs to them. Without urgency, without performance. He was dressed in charcoal gray, no tie, collar open. Dark hair going silver at the temples. She estimated his age somewhere between 45 and 50, but built to look younger, with the particular stillness of someone who had learned a long time ago that stillness was its own kind of authority. She didn't know who he was. She didn't need to. She recognized the quality of his attention the way she recognized certain other things now. The weight a room shifted when particular men entered it, the texture of silence that preceded trouble, the difference between being looked at and being assessed. She kept walking and listening to Marcus Webb talk about cleaning protocols. Vincent Moreau had been in his booth since 7:50. This was not unusual. He kept irregular hours by habit and design, arriving at eclipse before the staff, leaving after the late service, sometimes staying through the night and into the gray morning hours with coffee and the kind of paperwork that never touched an accountant's desk. The club was the public face of an operation that had no public face, and he ran it with the same attention he gave everything else in his life, methodically, without sentiment, and with the understanding that the moment you stopped paying attention was the moment the structure began to deteriorate. He had seen the girl come through the corridor door at 8:47. He'd been watching the floor because watching was what he did. He watched the delivery men carry in the liquor order and noted which crates went where. He watched Marcus Webb cross the floor with his clipboard, and he watched the young woman follow Marcus out of the back corridor and cross toward the bar. Massa. He noted the way she moved, the scanning quality of it, not curious, not tourist, the way her eyes found the exits in the same practice sequence he'd seen in soldiers and convicts and people who had, at some point, learned that knowing where the door was could mean the difference between getting out and not getting out. He noted the deliberate neutrality of her expression, the way she held her body slightly tucked, shoulders angled inward, as though making herself smaller was an automatic reflex. He had seen that reflex before. It had a specific origin. He didn't intervene in Marcus's hiring decisions. He paid the man to manage the floor staff, and the man did it competently, and Vincent's involvement in day-to-day hiring was not a dynamic he'd established or intended to change. He returned his attention to the papers on the table in front of him. He didn't think about the girl again until 2 hours later. He was in the back office on the second floor, going through the previous month's reconciliation with his accountant Sal Benedetti, when he heard the commotion from the main floor below, not loud enough to constitute a scene, but loud enough to register through the closed office door as something outside the normal rhythm of a club that wasn't yet open. Sal, he held up a hand. Sal stopped talking. Vincent listened. Voices, Marcus's, tight and uncertain. Another voice, louder, smoother, carrying the particular cadence of a man accustomed to not being contradicted. And underneath those voices, something that might have been silence or might have been the absence of sound from a third person who had stopped making any noise at all. He left the office. The main floor looked, at first pass, entirely normal. Marcus Webb was standing near the bar, speaking to a man in a pale blue suit who had his back to the stairs. Derek Holloway was 29 years old, the eldest son of Franklin Holloway, who ran a legitimate pharmaceutical distribution company out of King of Prussia and an illegitimate supplemental income through arrangements with Vincent's organization that benefited both parties and required nothing from either man that either man wasn't already comfortable providing. Derek had been in Eclipse before. Vincent knew his face the way he knew the faces of most people who moved in the concentric circles adjacent to his business. Not intimately, not with any particular warmth, but with the precision of a man who kept a comprehensive mental inventory of everyone who touched his world. Derek was laughing about something, his hand resting on the bar, projecting the ease of a man who had walked into a great many rooms and been welcomed in all of them. The cleaning girl was pressed against the far wall near the service corridor entrance. She hadn't made a sound. That was why Vincent hadn't heard her. She had flattened herself against the wall with her arms tight at her sides and her face turned away from the bar, and she was standing so completely still that for half a second Vincent's brain processed her as furniture. Then he saw the white of her knuckles where her hands were gripping the edge of her own jacket. Then he saw her face in profile, jaw set, eyes fixed on the service corridor door 5 feet away. The entire focus of her existence in this moment concentrated on that door. He watched her calculate the distance. He watched her decide. She moved. Not running. She was too controlled for that, too practiced at not drawing attention. But walking very fast, crossing the 5 feet to the corridor door and pushing through it in one fluid motion that was the physical equivalent of disappearing. Derek Holloway was still talking to Marcus Webb and hadn't turned around. Vincent descended the last 3 stairs to the main floor. Marcus saw him and straightened slightly, the way people straightened when Vincent entered a space, that involuntary recalibration that had nothing to do with affection. "Mr. Moreau," Marcus's voice was careful. "Derek," Vincent kept his voice even. "Didn't know you were coming by." Derek Holloway turned and smiled the smile of a man who smiled easily because smiling had always worked. "Vincent, hey, I was in the neighborhood." He said it like it was funny. "Thought I'd check the place out before the season gets busy. My father's been talking about doing an event here in the fall." "Your father can call my office." Vincent said it without inflection, like he usually does. A half-beat of something moved across Derek Holloway's face. Not quite discomfort, not quite recognition of the dismissal. Just a flicker. Then the smile reasserted itself. "Sure, absolutely, I'll tell him." He straightened his jacket. "Good to see you, man." "Yeah." After Derek left through the front entrance, Vincent stood at the bar for a moment. Marcus Webb stood next to him, holding his clipboard in the way a man holds something when he's waiting to understand the temperature of a situation before he decides how to stand. "The girl," Vincent said. "Sir?" "The one you were walking through. Where'd she go?" Marcus blinked. I think she went back to the corridor. I don't know. I lost track of her when Mr. Holloway came in. You want me to find out if she's still in the building?" Marcus found her in the supply room. She was sitting on the floor behind a shelf of cleaning products with her knees pulled to her chest, and she looked up when Marcus opened the door with the expression of someone who had been caught doing something that was going to cost them. "Hey." Marcus crouched down to her level. "You okay?" "I'm sorry." She said it immediately, reflexively, before he'd asked anything that required an apology. "I'm sorry. I just needed a minute. I'll go." "You don't have to go." He paused. "Mr. Moreau wants to talk to you." The color in her face, already diminished, went down another register. Vincent was standing in the corridor when Marcus brought her out. He studied her for a moment without speaking. Up close, she looked younger than she'd seemed from the booth, and more damaged, not visibly, not in ways a stranger would necessarily clock, but in the specific language of someone whose body had been trained by experience to expect the worst outcome of any given interaction. He recognized the posture, the slightly tucked chin, the hands held open at her sides in a way that was not relaxed but rather deliberately non-threatening, preemptive, the way an animal shows its belly to something larger. "What's your name?" he said. "Avery." "Avery." He let the name sit for a second. "You know who that man was?" She said nothing. That was its own answer. "Where do you live?" She gave him an address on Spring Garden. Gave it without hesitation, which meant she'd prepared it, and it was the preparation, the readiness of the lie. That told him more than the lie itself. How long have you been in the city? About 2 months? You got family here? No. He looked at her for a long moment. She held his gaze, which took effort. He could see the effort it took, the small, deliberate act of will it required for her to not look at the floor. You want the job? He said. Something shifted in her expression. Not relief. Something more complicated and more guarded than relief. Yes. Marcus? He looked at the floor manager. She's hired. Thursday rotation. He looked back at the girl. You show up, you do the work, you get paid. Nobody here is going to bother you. He said it flatly, not as a reassurance, but as a statement of fact, the way he stated most things, as conditions rather than comforts. He walked back toward the stairs. He was halfway up when he stopped and said, without turning around, "That address you gave me, Spring Garden." A pause. It's a parking lot. He heard nothing from below. No protest, no explanation, no sound at all. He continued up the stairs. In his office, he closed the door and stood at the window that looked out over the alley and thought about the way Avery Quinn had pressed herself against the wall when Derek Holloway walked into the room. He thought about the way a person learns to do that, the specific education required. He thought about Derek Holloway's smile and the particular ease of it, and the way ease like that was built, not through innocence or simplicity, but through the long practice of never having experienced consequences. He thought about the address that was a parking lot. He called his head of security, a man named Roman Voss, who had worked for Vincent for 11 years and who understood, without requiring explanation, the difference between official business and the other kind. I need a quiet check on someone, Vincent said. Name's Avery Quinn, 18 maybe, dark hair, shows up Thursday for the cleaning crew. I want to know where she actually sleeps. Roman said he'd handle it. Vincent returned to his paperwork. He told himself the matter was logged and contained and that he'd review whatever Roman found and act accordingly or not act at all, depending on what it was. He told himself this was due diligence, standard practice, the responsible management of his house and everything in it. He believed approximately 60% of this. Avery came back Thursday. She'd arrived 12 minutes early, which Marcus noted on his clipboard with the particular satisfaction of a man who had been disappointed too many times. She worked without talking, which suited the other members of the cleaning crew fine, since 3 of them didn't speak much English, and the 4th was a middle-aged woman named Connie who had been cleaning Eclipse for 4 years and had perfected the art of working in complete silence, in a way that discouraged conversation without being unfriendly. She was thorough. That also registered with Marcus, the way she worked a section of floor completely before moving to the next, the way she checked corners and underneath things that most people skipped. Efficient but not hurried. She moved through the space the same way she'd entered it that first morning, with the cataloging attention of someone who never fully stopped monitoring their environment. At 11:55, Marcus handed her the cash for the shift, and she took it and folded it without counting it and put it in her jacket pocket and said thank you, in a tone that meant it. She was walking toward the service exit when Roman Voss stepped into the corridor. Roman was 6'3", built in the way of a man who had spent a serious portion of his life lifting things that resisted being lifted, and he had a face that conveyed nothing except the bare fact of his presence. He said, "Mr. Moreau wants a word," and he said it with his body turned slightly sideways, not blocking the exit, but positioned in a way that made the calculus of going around him somewhat complicated. Avery stopped. She looked at the exit. She looked at Roman Voss. She looked at the exit again. "He's not going to hurt you." Roman said it the way he said most things, with the complete absence of affect that was either reassuring or terrifying depending on your particular situation. She followed Roman up the stairs. Vincent's office was a large room that managed to be both functional and austere. A heavy desk, 2 chairs, a row of filing cabinets, a window. No art on the walls except for a large city map with certain neighborhoods marked in red. Books on the shelves behind the desk, which surprised most people. A small bar cart in the corner that he rarely touched. He was sitting at the desk when Avery came in. Roman closed the door from outside. "Sit down," Vincent said. She sat. He put a folder on the desk and opened it. Inside were several printed pages. He didn't look at them. He'd already read them. He watched her instead. "The shelter on Callow Hill," he said. "Day 46. You've got roughly 2 weeks before you age out of the emergency placement. She didn't say anything. The thing happening in her face was controlled and complicated, and he watched it without comment. The address you gave Marcus. The parking lot on Spring Garden. He paused. I'm not interested in the lie. I'm interested in why you needed it. He leaned back. The name on the intake form at the shelter, different from the name you gave Marcus. She was very still now. I'm not a cop, he said. I'm not going to turn you over to anyone. I'm going to ask you one question, and I need a straight answer. He waited until she met his eyes. Do you know Derek Holloway? The stillness went deeper. It became a different kind of stillness, the kind that comes before something breaks or before something holds. She looked at him for 3 seconds with an expression he had learned over a life built in the spaces between danger and decision to read accurately. It was the expression of someone deciding whether the truth was survivable. Yes, she said. He nodded slowly. How? She looked at the window, then back at him. You won't believe me. Tell me anyway. She told him. She spoke without looking at him for most of it, her voice quiet and steady and almost entirely without inflection, which he understood was not absence of feeling but maximum compression of it, the way you speak about something when you cannot afford to feel it and still produce words at the same time. She told him about the night she'd been walking home from her shift at the diner on Kensington, and the car that had pulled alongside her, and the man who'd gotten out, and the things she'd tried to do, and what had happened after. She told him about the room she'd woken up in, the series of rooms after that, the other women, the sequence of relocations that she'd eventually stopped trying to track because tracking them required more hope than she had left. She told him about the point where she'd stopped trying to understand the structure of it and started trying to understand the specific mechanics of whatever particular location she was in and whether those mechanics contained anything exploitable. She told him about the window in the third location that had been improperly secured. She told him about running in the rain for 40 minutes in the wrong shoes and arriving at the shelter on Callow Hill with her feet bleeding and her name already changed in her own mind to something no one was looking for. She stopped talking. Vincent sat without moving for a long time. How many women? He said. I counted 31 in the locations I was in, but those weren't... She stopped. Those weren't all of them. They moved people a lot. I think the whole thing is bigger than what I saw. And Holloway was... He came to the second location. He's the one who told the men there which of us were... She stopped again. She chose a different phrasing. He was making decisions about where people went. Vincent stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her for a long moment, looking at the alley below. You have the name you're using, he said. Avery Quinn. Yes. Stay with it. Don't change it again. He turned. You're going to need somewhere to live before the shelter placement ends. He said it like a practical problem, which it was. I have a property on Locust Street. It's a floor unit, currently unoccupied. It's clean and it has locks. You can stay there until you have enough saved for somewhere of your own. She looked at him with an expression that was not gratitude and was not wariness exactly, but was the specific combination of both that a person produces when they have learned not to trust offers. I'm not offering you charity, he said, reading the expression accurately. I'm offering you a location. You work the cleaning crew. You pay something nominal each week. You stay until you've got enough for a deposit elsewhere. It's a transaction. He paused. No one from Holloway's world knows this address or has access to it. She said nothing for a moment. Then, why? It was not a naive question. It was a specific and serious one, and it deserved a specific answer. He considered how to answer it honestly. Because he operated inside this city, he said finally, under my attention. And I didn't see it. He said the last part without inflection, but she was paying the kind of attention that caught inflection. That's on me. She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. Once, compact, a decision made. He called Roman back in and gave him the Locust Street information and told him to handle the logistics tonight. He told Marcus to put Avery on the regular Thursday, Friday, Saturday rotation. He did all of this in the normal register of his work voice, and Roman and Marcus received it the same way, as operational instruction. When they were gone and he was alone in the office, he sat back down and opened a different folder. This one contained what Roman had pulled together about Derek Holloway in the 72 hours since Vincent had made the initial request. It was preliminary. Surface information, business filings, public records, a few observations from Roman's street contacts. Nothing definitive, but the shape of it was recognizable, the way certain shapes were recognizable before the details resolved. He read through it twice. He noted the addresses of 3 warehouse properties registered to an LLC with no visible connection to the Holloway name. He noted the names of 2 men who appeared repeatedly in connection with those properties, and whom Roman's contacts associated with transportation logistics of the kind that moved things that were not listed on any manifest. He noted the date of a liquor license application for a venue on Delaware Avenue that had been approved and then quietly never opened. He closed the folder. He thought about Franklin Holloway, Derek's father, and the 15 years of mutually beneficial arrangement that sat between their organizations. He thought about what it meant to discover something like this in the shadow of a relationship like that. He thought about the professional obligation of careful verification before action, and he thought about Avery Quinn's face when she'd described the second location and what she'd seen Derek Holloway decide. He thought about a specific principle he'd maintained for 23 years in this business, that certain activities were categorically outside the structure of anything he ran or sanctioned or tolerated in proximity to his operation. Not from sentiment, from the understanding that some lines, once crossed, could not be uncrossed, and that the contamination of proximity to such crossings was both moral and practical. He had put men in the hospital for infractions far smaller than this. He picked up his phone and called a man named Carver, who handled the kind of investigative work that didn't appear on any employment record, and he told Carver to start pulling thread on Derek Holloway. All of it, deep and quiet and fast. "How quiet?" Carver said. "So quiet nobody in the Holloway family hears footsteps until I tell you otherwise. And if I find something?" "You're going to find something," Vincent said. "The question is how much." He hung up and sat in his empty office, and outside the window the city was loud with the particular noise of a summer Friday night in Philadelphia, traffic and music and the specific texture of a city that ran on a kind of energy that was not precisely hope, but was not quite the opposite of it either. He thought about how long it would take Carver to pull together a preliminary picture. He thought about Roman installing locks on the Locust Street unit and whether Roman would remember to check the window mechanisms. He thought about 31. The number Avery had given him. He thought about the word counted, the specific act of counting, the effort and purpose behind deciding to keep that particular tally when everything else was being taken from you. He thought about Derek Holloway's smile, the ease of it, the structure underneath the ease. His phone buzzed, a message from Roman. "Unit's ready, she's in." He read it twice. Then he put the phone down and went back to work. 4 days later, Carver called. "You're going to want to sit down," Carver said. "I'm sitting." The 3 warehouse properties. 2 of them have been used in the last 8 months, based on utility consumption and some door contact data I pulled from a building management system they weren't careful about securing. The third one? A pause. The third one has a refrigeration unit, industrial, running continuously, in a building that, on paper, stores textiles. Vincent said nothing. There are 6 names on the transportation logistics side. 2 of them I trace to a holding company in Delaware, which traces back to a parent company in the Caymans, which, Carver paused again, which has the Holloway Family Trust as a 30% stakeholder. The other 4 names. 2 are small-time, drivers, basically. The other 2, Carver's voice shifted slightly. One of them is Marcus Tillman, the name registered like a key in a lock. Vincent knew Marcus Tillman. Tillman ran a security consulting firm that did work for 3 of the city's largest commercial real estate developers, and had, 2 years ago, been hired by an associate of Vincent's to provide venue security for a series of events. Tillman was connected. Tillman had clients and relationships and a legitimate business that provided perfect cover for knowing which buildings were empty and when and for how long. And the 4th? Carver said a name that Vincent had not expected. He sat with that name for a long moment. "You sure?" he said. 3 separate cross-references. "Yeah, I'm sure." After he hung up, Vincent sat at his desk and looked at the city map on the wall with its red markings and thought about the architecture of what he'd just been told, the way it connected, The way the connections explained certain things he'd noticed and not followed and now wished he had followed sooner. He thought about the fourth name and what it meant for the scope of this, for the depth of it, for the number of people who had known or suspected or looked away. He picked up his phone and called Roman. "I need a meeting," he said. "Inner Circle, tonight, not at Eclipse." Location? The Fairmount House. Roman was quiet for a second. The Fairmount House was used for conversations that did not happen anywhere that could be surveilled or subpoenaed or traced. How serious? Vincent looked at the city map. At the red markings that represented the edges of his authority, the borders of the territory he'd spent 2 decades building and maintaining and defending. He thought about what it meant that something like this had been growing inside those borders, in the shadows he was supposed to be watching, for long enough that a girl had time to be taken and moved again, and eventually escape through an improperly secured window in the rain. "Serious enough that I want everyone there before midnight," he said. He set the phone down. Outside, Philadelphia kept moving. The August heat had finally broken slightly in the evening air. A front coming in from the west, the first hint of something that was not quite autumn, but was no longer purely summer either. The city's noise carried up to the office window, and beneath it, if you were very quiet and very still, you could almost hear the way the whole structure of a thing begins to shift when someone finally decides to pull the first thread. Vincent Moreau was not a man given to metaphor. But sitting in his office on the second floor of Eclipse with Carver's information open in front of him, and 4 names that connected an operation he hadn't known existed to people he'd trusted, and money he'd watched move through his city for years, he understood that what he'd just uncovered was not the edge of something, it was the center. And the center was larger and darker and more deeply rooted in the fabric of his city than anything he had been prepared to find. His phone buzzed again. Roman. All 4 confirmed for midnight. Vincent closed the folder. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair, and on his way out the door he stopped for 1 second at the window and looked down at the alley where, 3 days ago, a frightened 18-year-old had stood and decided whether a stranger's offer was survivable. He thought about the number 31. He thought about the 4th name. Then he walked out, and the door closed behind him. And somewhere beneath the city's noise, the machinery of consequence began, very quietly, to move. The Fairmount House smelled like old wood and river damp, and the particular staleness of a space that was opened infrequently and closed quickly. It sat on a narrow street 3 blocks from the water, a row house that looked from the outside like every other row house on the block. A little worn, a little dark, nothing worth a second glance. Inside it was clean and spare. A main room with a table, 6 chairs, a lamp in the corner, blackout curtains on every window. No phones allowed past the front door. Roman collected them in a canvas bag before anyone sat down. The 4 men who arrived before midnight were not men Vincent socialized with. They were men he worked with, which was a different thing entirely, and the distinction mattered in a room like this one. Dominic Reyes ran the Southside Distribution Network. 41 years old, compact and dark-eyed, a man who had come up through the organization the hard way and bore the evidence of that ascent in a jaw that had been broken twice and reset imperfectly. He sat down without greeting anyone and folded his hands on the table and waited. Paul Sheridan handled money, not accounting, but the movement of it, the conversion of it, the transformation of cash that existed into assets that appeared to have always existed. He was 53 and looked 60 and dressed better than anyone else in the room, which he had done every day of his adult life as a way of communicating something about his relationship to the work that he never said aloud. Eddie Marsh was the youngest of them at 36, and he ran enforcement, not street level, but the organizational architecture of it, who was deployed where and when and what the threshold was for escalating a situation from conversation to consequence. He had a stillness to him that was different from Vincent's stillness. Vincent's was deliberate. Eddie's was the kind that came from a very short fuse attached to a very long patience. And then there was Frank Caruso, who was 61 and had been with Vincent since the beginning, since the actual beginning when there was nothing to be with yet, and the whole thing was still being constructed out of necessity and nerve. Frank ran nothing currently. He had stepped back from operational roles 3 years ago at his doctor's insistence and his wife's ultimatum, and he now functioned as something that had no official title. Conscience was too soft a word. Historian was too passive. He was the person in the room whose opinion Vincent weighed most carefully and argued with most frequently. Roman stood at the door. Vincent put Carver's summary on the table. Not the full file. The summary, 2 pages, the essential architecture without the granular detail. "Read it," he said. They read it. The room was quiet for a long time. Dominic looked up first. "The refrigeration unit." "Yeah." "In the textile warehouse." "Yeah." Dominic put the paper down and looked at the wall. Paul Sheridan read his page twice, which was unusual for him. He set it down with the precise care of a man handling something he didn't want to touch. "The Cayman structure," he said. "That's not improvised. That's been running for," he calculated, "minimum 3 years to set up something that clean." "Longer," Vincent said. "Based on the utility data, the warehouses were active before the holding structure was complete. They started small and built the financial cover around it after. So we're not talking about a kid who got ambitious," Frank Caruso said. He said it slowly, in the tone of a man working through the implications in real time and not liking where they landed. "No. Derek Holloway is 29 years old," Frank said. "He didn't build a Cayman holding structure." "No," Vincent agreed. "He didn't." The table was quiet for a moment, with the particular quiet of men who were working out something they didn't want to say first. It was Eddie Marsh who said it. "Franklin." The name sat on the table like something physical. Vincent didn't confirm or deny it. He didn't have to. The fact that he'd called this meeting in this house with this particular group at this hour was confirmation enough. Frank Caruso exhaled through his nose. It was not a dramatic sound. It was the sound of a man who had spent 30 years watching the way things went and recognizing, without pleasure, that this was a version of the way things went. 15 years, he said. "Yeah. Everything's run clean between us and Franklin for 15 years. Has it?" Vincent said. Not a question. A reframing. He watched Frank's expression shift as the reframing landed. The understanding that clean meant, in this context, clean as far as any of them had known to look. "You think he was running this the whole time?" Dominic said. "I think the structure is too developed for him not to have known about it," Vincent said. "Whether he built it or whether it grew up inside something he built, and he chose not to look at it too closely, that distinction matters legally. It doesn't matter to me." Dominic nodded once, slowly, the way a man nods when he's filing something. Paul Sheridan said, "If we move on this and Franklin's directly involved, we're looking at a war with the distribution network on the main line. That's not a small problem." "I know what it is. His people are our people in 3 of the 4 northern districts. The supply chain for—" "Paul." Vincent's voice was even. "I know what it means. I need you to tell me the financial exposure of pulling the Holloway connection completely. All of it. How long to restructure the distribution without them?" Paul looked at him for a moment. Then he reached for the paper again and turned it over and took a pen from his jacket pocket. He started writing numbers. Frank Caruso said quietly, "Vincent?" "Frank, you're sure about this?" Vincent looked at him. Frank had a specific way of asking whether he was sure about things, and it always meant the same thing. It was not a question about the facts. It was a question about the cost. Frank had known him long enough to ask the question with one word, and have it mean all of that. "I'm sure," Vincent said. Frank looked at the table. He looked like a man doing arithmetic that kept coming out to the same answer no matter how he approached it. "All right," he said. Roman spoke from the door. "There's something else." Everyone looked at him. One of Carver's contacts put a flag on Marcus Tillman an hour ago. Roman's voice was flat, informational. "Tillman had a meeting tonight, private, not at his office. The contact couldn't get close enough to hear, but one of the people he met with," Roman paused, "was Derek Holloway." The room's temperature changed. "That's 4 hours after Carver pulled the connection between Tillman and the warehouses," Eddie said. "Yeah," Roman said. "That's a fast timeline," Dominic said. "Carver's contact could be burned." "Carver's contact isn't the problem," Vincent said, and he said it with the particular flatness that meant he'd already thought through what the problem was. Tillman meeting with Derek tonight means one of 2 things. Either Tillman called the meeting because he felt something move, he paused, or Derek called it. If Derek called it, Eddie said, Derek felt something move. The room was very quiet. "How?" Paul said. Not rhetorically, practically. Running the sequence. "We've had this file for less than 12 hours. Who outside this room has seen it? Carver, Vincent said. Roman. That's it? That's it. Then Derek didn't feel the investigation, Paul said. So what did he feel? And then it landed, the way certain things land, not loudly, but with the specific weight of something that had been sitting just outside your peripheral vision. Vincent understood before he finished the thought. The girl, Dominic said. He came to Eclipse 4 days ago, Roman said. He saw her. Vincent stood up. The movement was controlled, but everyone in the room registered it. Vincent was not a man who moved suddenly in meetings. The fact that he'd stood before the conversation was finished meant something, and all 4 men at the table read what it meant with the accuracy of people who had been paying attention to the same man for a very long time. How secured is the Locust Street unit? Eddie said, already ahead of it. Roman secured it, Vincent said, looking at Roman. Double bolted. The building has a camera on the entrance. I have the feed on my phone. Roman was already pulling it out. He looked at the screen, then at Vincent. She's there. The light's on. It needs to be more than a camera, Vincent said. Tonight. I'll go, Roman said. Take Mateo. Roman's secondary. Younger, faster, better suited to unobtrusive positioning. Don't knock. She doesn't need to know you're there. Just make sure the building's clean. Roman left. The meeting continued for another 40 minutes and covered the essential logistics. Carver's investigation would expand to include all 6 names and the financial trail from the Cayman structure backward. Paul would begin modeling the cost of a clean Holloway separation. Dominic would do a quiet audit of every arrangement in the northern districts that touched a Holloway-adjacent entity. Eddie would put discreet eyes on the 3 warehouse properties. No one would speak to Franklin Holloway. No one would change their behavior toward Derek Holloway. Nothing would indicate that anything had changed. And if Tillman moves before we're ready, Dominic said, then we respond to what he does, Vincent said, but we don't initiate until I have the complete picture. He said it like a man who understood the value of patience. He believed it with about 70% of himself. The other 30% was in a car with Roman heading to Locust Street. The next morning, Avery was at the Locust Street unit when Vincent knocked at 8. She answered the door the way she answered everything, with her weight slightly back, her hand on the edge of the door, the angle of her body arranged for maximum exit optionality. She was wearing yesterday's clothes and holding a mug of something, and she looked at him with an expression that was not surprised and not welcoming, but was not hostile either. It was the expression of someone who had decided to take him at his word and was monitoring whether that decision was turning out to be correct. He came inside and stood in the small living area. Roman had done the unit adequately. Clean furniture, working heat, new locks. It looked like a place someone could live while they figured out the next part. Derek Holloway came to Eclipse on Monday, he said. I need to know if he saw your face clearly. Avery put the mug down on the counter. She was very still for a second. Yes, she said. He looked right at me. A pause. I don't think he recognized me immediately. I looked different when... She stopped. My hair was longer. I was... Another stop. I looked different. But you're not certain he didn't recognize you? I'm not certain. He nodded. He met with someone last night, someone connected to the operation you described. He watched her absorb that. Which means, if he did recognize you, he's already talking to people about it. The color in her face shifted, not dramatically, just a degree or two toward the kind of pallor that was less about shock and more about a person recalculating how much time they had. Am I safe here? She said. For now, I have people in the building. He paused. But I need to ask you something, and I need everything you know. Addresses, names, faces, descriptions, the locations you were held, the people you saw making decisions, everything. I already told you, sir. You told me enough for me to know what I was looking at, he said. Now I need to know all of it. He pulled the second chair from the table and set it down and sat. Everything. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she sat down across from him and began to talk. She talked for 2 hours. He didn't interrupt except to ask for clarification on specific details. An address she couldn't fully recall, a man's name she'd heard once and wasn't certain of, the sequence of a particular move between locations. He wrote nothing down. He would give Roman the highlights afterward, and Roman would get it to Carver. But in this room there was no paper and no recording, and the information existed only in the space between the two of them. She described 4 locations she'd been certain of, and 2 she'd been less certain of because they'd moved her at night, and she hadn't seen enough to place them. She described 9 people by physical description, occupation, and behavior. She described Derek Holloway's 2 visits in detail: what he'd said, how he'd moved, who he'd spoken to, what decisions had followed each visit. She described a man she'd heard the others call the broker, who was not Derek and not anyone with a Holloway name, but who appeared to function above Derek in some capacity she couldn't entirely map, giving instructions rather than receiving them, having conversations with Derek in a register that suggested authority rather than partnership. The broker, Vincent said. You heard a name? A letter. Like an initial, she thought. Something that started with a T. She looked frustrated at the edge of her own memory. They were careful. They didn't use names around us. What did he look like? She described him. Mid-50s, heavy through the chest, a specific scar on his left forearm that she'd noticed when he'd rolled up his sleeve. Gray in his beard, but not his hair, which she'd found odd enough to remember. A Philadelphia accent, but not the way people born here sounded. More like someone who'd been away for a long time and come back. Vincent filed this without expression. You counted 31 women, he said, in the locations I was in directly. Yes. How many in each location? She walked through it. He listened to every number. When she finished, there was a silence in the room that was not uncomfortable but was dense, full of the specific gravity of information that could not be unfelt once it had been given. He sat with it for a moment and let it settle into the part of him that kept tally of things. Okay, he said. What does that mean? She said. Okay. It means I have what I need to move. He stood up. It means I know the shape of it now. Are you going to the police? The question was not naive. It was specific. The careful question of someone who had thought about what the police would mean and was asking him to be honest about what he intended. Some of it will end up with the federal people, he said. The evidence I build will need to go somewhere that can use it legally, but I'm not going to the police first. He paused. That would take too long and lose too many of the people in the middle before they could be caught. She looked at him steadily. And you're going to do what first? Close the locations, get the women out. He said it flatly. Then I'll worry about the legal architecture. She held his gaze. Why do you care? She said. And the way she said it was not an accusation. It was the genuine inquiry of a person who had learned to question the motives behind any offered help, because every previous offer had come with a cost. You don't know any of them. He thought about Frank Caruso asking, You're sure about this? He thought about the conversation he'd have with Franklin Holloway when the time came. He thought about the 15 years and the money that had moved through his organization and what percentage of it had been clean and what percentage of it had been funded at the bottom of the ledger by what Avery Quinn had just spent 2 hours describing. I'm not sure I have a good answer to that, he said. It was the most honest thing he'd said in this room, and something in her expression shifted slightly when he said it. Not warmth, not trust, but something that was adjacent to recognition. The specific acknowledgement one person gives another when they say something true instead of something useful. He left. He was on the stairs when his phone buzzed. Roman. Carver says the bartender from Eclipse is missing. Tommy Weiss. Didn't come home last night. His wife called the bar. Vincent stopped on the stairs. Tommy Weiss had worked the bar at Eclipse for 3 years. He was 26, unremarkable, good at his job, the kind of man who blended into the background of any room. He had been behind the bar on Monday afternoon when Derek Holloway had walked in. He had been close enough to see Avery Quinn press herself against the wall. Vincent typed back, When was he last seen? Roman. Yesterday afternoon. Left his apartment around 3. Didn't come back. The arithmetic was fast and ugly. Derek Holloway had met with Marcus Tillman the night before last. Someone had made a move on Tommy Weiss yesterday afternoon. The sequence was tight and deliberate and pointed in one direction. Derek was cleaning up his sight lines, moving fast and moving messy, which meant he was scared, which should have been reassuring but was not. Scared men moved sloppily, but they also moved lethally, because scared men in Derek Holloway's position could not afford to be sloppy twice. Vincent came back down the stairs and knocked on the Locust Street door again. Avery opened it and looked at his face and didn't say anything. "You're not leaving this unit," he said. "Not for work, not for the shelter, not for anything until I tell you otherwise." He watched her process the shift in register. "I mean that. The door stays locked and you don't answer it for anyone except Roman." "What happened?" she said. "Someone who could connect you to Monday is missing." She understood immediately. He could see her understand. Not the specific mechanics of it, but the principle, the implication, the thing it meant for her. "How missing?" "The kind that doesn't come back," he said. And he said it without softening it, because softening it would have been condescending, and she deserved the straight version. "I'm sorry." She nodded. It was a strange nod. Not grief, not shock. Just the motion of someone absorbing a weight they'd been expecting and had prepared for, and which still hit with its full force anyway. "The security guard," she said. "The one at the door Monday. Did he see me too?" Vincent's stomach tightened in the specific way it tightened when he'd been half a step behind something. He was already calling Roman before she finished the sentence. "The door security on Monday's day shift," he said when Roman picked up. "Name, location, get there now." Roman said 3 words and ended the call. Vincent stood in the doorway of the Locust Street unit with his phone in his hand and the particular feeling in his chest of a man who had started pulling thread and was now watching the whole garment come apart faster than he'd expected. "Vincent!" Avery said his name for the first time, and she said it with a flatness that matched his own. "They're not going to stop." "No," he said, "because I'm still here." "Yes." She looked at him with those green eyes that had been watching exits for as long as she could remember. "Then stop waiting," she said. "Whatever you're building up to, stop waiting to build it." He looked at her for a moment. At 18 years old and what 18 years old looked like, when it had been through what she'd been through and come out still capable of giving instructions. "Get some sleep," he said. He left. He walked to his car and sat in it for 60 seconds without starting the engine, which was 60 seconds longer than he normally allowed himself for anything that wasn't immediately productive. But he needed the 60 seconds, and he took them. Then he started the engine and called Carver. "How fast can you give me something actionable on the first warehouse?" he said. "Define actionable. An address, a layout, and an estimate of what's inside." 48 hours, Carver said. "Maybe 36 if I cut some corners." "Don't cut corners, but don't take 48. He paused. "The security guard from Eclipse, day shift Monday. Roman's going to send you a name in the next 10 minutes. Find him before—" His phone buzzed with an incoming call. "Roman." "I have to go," he told Carver. He switched lines. "Roman." Roman's voice was quiet and specific in the way it got when he was reporting something from a scene. The guard's name was Carlos Peña, 23. His roommate called it in an hour ago. A pause. "He's not missing. He's in the Schuylkill River. They'd put him in the river." Vincent sat with that for 2 seconds. 2 people in 2 days. The operation that had been moving carefully and slowly for years was suddenly moved. The engine was still running. Vincent sat in the car outside the Locust Street building with Roman's voice gone from the phone and the phone still in his hand and the particular quality of silence that followed information like that. Not peaceful, not empty, but pressurized, the way air feels before a storm that has already decided what it's going to do. Carlos Peña, 23 years old, in the Schuylkill River. He put the car in drive. He called Eddie Marsh on the way and gave him 2 instructions. Put eyes on every Holloway-connected address in Carver's file starting now, and find Marcus Tillman's current location without making contact. Eddie said nothing except yes and hung up. This was one of the qualities Vincent valued most in Eddie. The man understood that certain moments were not moments for questions. He called Carver next. "The timeline has moved," he said. 2 people connected to Monday are gone. Derek is cleaning house." Carver's voice was careful. "How far does the cleaning go?" "I don't know yet. That's why I'm calling you. I need the warehouse layout tonight, not in 36 hours. Whatever you have, half-finished, working theory, anything. I have a partial on the first address. Utility maps, 1 exterior walk past my contact did this morning. It's thin. Send it." "Vincent?" Carver paused in the way he paused when he was deciding whether to say something. "There's something else. It came in 20 minutes ago and I was going to sit on it until I had more, but given what you just told me, say it." One of the financial cross-references on the Cayman structure, Carver said. I traced a secondary account. Payments going out on a regular schedule to a numbered account in the Caymans. He paused again. The account receives the payment and forwards it. Same amount, same schedule, every month for the last 2 years. Forwards it where? Carver said where. Vincent's hand tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't speak for 3 seconds, which was the longest pause Carver had heard from him in 11 years of working together. You're certain, Vincent said. I ran it 4 times. He hung up. He drove for 6 blocks without registering the route, and then pulled over on a side street near the art museum and sat with the engine idling and what Carver had just told him arranging itself in his chest into the specific shape of a thing he didn't want to be true. He had a policy about things he didn't want to be true. He looked at them directly and completely, without the comfortable softening that came from looking at an angle, because looking at an angle was how you got surprised later, and being surprised later was always worse than the pain of looking straight. He looked straight at it. Paul Sheridan, 53 years old, 15 years, the money moving through his hands every month for the last 2 years, forwarded clean and regular and quiet to a structure that sat 2 layers above Derek Holloway's operation in the financial architecture. Not a passive beneficiary, an active participant. Regular payments meant regular service. And Paul Sheridan's particular service, the movement and conversion of money, the transformation of dirty income into clean assets, was exactly the service that an operation like Derek's required to function at scale. He thought about last night's meeting at the Fairmount House, Paul at the table with the others, reading Carver's summary, writing numbers on the back of the page, modeling the cost of separating from the Holloway network, modeling it, sending it back to them. Within 4 hours of that meeting, Tommy Weiss was gone. Vincent pressed the heel of his hand against his sternum, a gesture so private and so brief that only an observer in the car with him would have caught it, the physical expression of a calculation landing somewhere it had no business landing. Paul had been in the room. Paul had heard every name Vincent had said, every connection Carver had traced, every piece of the operational picture that Vincent had laid out for his inner circle. And within hours, the people who could identify Avery Quinn were being put in the river. He called Roman. Paul Sheridan, he said when Roman picked up. A beat of silence. What about him? Where is he right now? Another beat, this one longer, weighted differently. Roman was a man who processed quickly, and the processing was visible even over the phone in the quality of his silences. I don't know. You want me to find him? Yes, don't approach. Don't let him know you're looking. Just find him and hold the position and call me. He got out of the car. He needed 60 seconds of cold air and ground under his feet, and the particular realignment that came from standing on pavement instead of sitting in a machine. He stood on the side street with his jacket open and the August night hitting his face and thought about the structure of the last 72 hours, the sequence of it, the timing, the specific pieces of information that had moved from his circle outward and what had happened in the hours after each piece moved. The meeting at Fairmount had been the largest leak, but before that, the initial request to Carver, the property check on Avery, the hiring at Eclipse, all of it had passed through channels that touched Paul Sheridan at some point. Not all of it, but enough. He thought about Tommy Weiss, about Carlos Peña in the squirrel kill, about the speed of Derek's response, the precision of it, the way it had targeted exactly the right people in exactly the right sequence. That precision required current information, real-time information, not guesswork. He got back in the car. He drove to the Fairmount House because it was the one location that Paul Sheridan knew, but that could not be easily connected to Vincent through any record. And he sat inside it at the table where they'd all sat 12 hours ago and waited for Roman to call. Roman called at 2:40 in the morning. He's at his place on Rittenhouse, Roman said. Lights on. Looks like he's been home for a while. Alone? His wife's there. Kids are grown. They're not there. Vincent sat with this for a moment. Going to Paul's home, with Paul's wife present, at 3 in the morning was a version of this conversation that he did not want to have. Not for Paul's sake. For the wife, who had known Vincent for 15 years and made him coffee at dinner parties, and was not part of any of this and did not deserve the specific kind of terror that would accompany 3 men arriving at her door in the middle of the night. Tell him to come to Fairmount, Vincent said. Call him yourself. Tell him it's urgent. Tell him I need him. A pause. And if he runs, He won't run, Vincent said. He doesn't know what I know yet, Roman called. 12 minutes later, Paul Sheridan's car parked outside the Fairmount house, and Paul came through the door, straightening his jacket. He'd dressed before coming, which was Paul, always dressed. And he looked at the room and looked at Vincent sitting alone at the table and looked at Roman closing the door behind him. And Vincent watched the specific sequence of Paul's expression as it moved from concern to professional attention to something that paused for just a fraction of a second at uncertainty before settling into the careful neutral that Paul Sheridan had been wearing as his default face for as long as Vincent had known him. The fraction of a second was enough. "Sit down," Vincent said. Paul sat. He set his keys on the table, a controlled gesture, the kind you make when you are giving yourself something to do with your hands. "The secondary account," Vincent said, "came in structure. $3,400 a month for the last 26 months. Paul's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, and a man who didn't know his face wouldn't have caught it. "I don't know what you're—" "Paul." Vincent's voice was completely level. "Tommy Weiss is dead. Carlos Peña is in the river. 2 people who saw Avery Quinn's face on Monday. Both of them gone inside 48 hours of me sitting in this room and telling you what I'd found." The silence was different now. Not the silence of a man thinking. The silence of a man standing at the edge of something and looking down. "The meeting last night," Vincent said. "You were the only person in this room who knew both sides of the information. You knew what I had on Derek, and you knew what Derek had running." Paul said nothing. "How long?" Vincent said. Paul exhaled through his nose, the same gesture Frank Caruso had made the night before, but with an entirely different meaning. He looked at the table. He looked at his keys. He looked at the wall. 2 years, he said finally. "It started 2 years ago." "How?" "Franklin came to me." Paul's voice was flat now, compressed down to the factual. "Not Derek. Franklin. He came to me and told me what they were doing and said he needed the financial architecture cleaned up, that the Cayman structure they'd built was leaking." He paused. "He offered me a percentage." "And you took it?" "Yes." The words sat on the table between them like a stone. "You sat in this room last night," Vincent said. "You listened to everything I told you about the investigation, the names, the warehouses, Carver's work." He paused. "And then you called Franklin." "I called Derek," Paul said. "Franklin doesn't take direct calls for anything connected to—" "I don't care which one you called." Vincent's voice had not risen, but it had changed in a way that made Roman straighten slightly at the door. "You gave them the information. They used it to put 2 people in the river." Paul's face did something complicated and not quite readable. It was not remorse exactly. It was the expression of a man who had maintained a particular structure of compartmentalization for 2 years and was watching that structure dissolve in real time. All the separations he'd built between the money and the specifics of what the money was, for collapsing into each other in a way he could no longer manage. "I didn't know they would," he started. "Stop," Vincent said it quietly. "Don't say you didn't know. You knew what you were moving money for. You knew what kind of people put refrigeration units in textile warehouses." He looked at Paul steadily. "You knew." Paul said nothing. Vincent stood up. He walked to the window and looked at the street outside. Empty, the narrow row of houses dark, a single streetlight casting orange on the wet pavement below. He stood there long enough that Paul might have hoped the conversation was shifting. It was not. "The girl," Vincent said, still looking at the window. "Avery Quinn, do they have her location?" Paul was quiet. Vincent turned. "Paul." "I gave them the Eclipse address," Paul said. "Monday night, after Derek called me about seeing someone at the club. I confirmed she was working there." He paused. "I didn't give them Locust Street. I didn't have it then. When Roman told me last night at the meeting—" He stopped. "When Roman mentioned the Locust Street unit at the meeting," Vincent said. Paul's silence was the answer. Vincent looked at Roman. Roman was already on his phone, moving toward the door. "Mateo's with her," he said, already dialing. "But I'm moving the location now." He was through the door and gone. Vincent turned back to Paul. Paul sat at the table with his keys and his careful jacket, and the architecture of 2 years of maintained separation now entirely dismantled, sitting in the wreckage of it with the particular expression of a man who had believed, until approximately 15 minutes ago, that he was managing the situation. What did you tell them about the investigation? Vincent said. Specifically, what did you give them from last night? Paul ran through it. He was thorough, which was consistent. Paul had always been thorough. The names Carver had identified, the warehouse addresses, the Tillman connection, the scope of what Vincent intended to do with the federal evidence. With every item, Vincent felt the shape of his operational plan adjusting. The warehouses were burned. Carver's identity was potentially compromised. The federal angle was now known to the other side, which meant they'd begin moving evidence and people and money through channels he'd have to rebuild from scratch to follow. 31 women, at minimum, distributed across a network that had just been warned that someone was coming. Vincent. Paul's voice had shifted again. It was lower now, carrying something that was not quite a plea but was in the same territory. I have a family. I know you do. Whatever you're going to do, I'm going to need you to call Derek Holloway, Vincent said. Right now, from your phone, and you're going to tell him that you've heard from a contact at the federal level that the investigation is being paused, that the evidence trail dried up, that he's clear. Paul stared at him. He won't believe. Make him believe it. You've been reliable for 2 years. Use that. Vincent's voice had no heat in it. It was the voice of a man deploying a tool. Buy me 24 hours of Derek thinking he's safe. That's all I need. And then I know where you are, Vincent said. It was not a threat in the theatrical sense. It was a statement of fact about the geometry of Paul Sheridan's immediate future, and Paul received it as such. The understanding that the space he occupied was now entirely defined by Vincent's knowledge of him and Vincent's willingness to act on that knowledge. Paul made the call. He was good at it, which was unsurprising. The same facility with presentation that made him effective at moving money made him effective at delivering a story with the right texture. Unhurried, lightly concerned, managing down a situation. Vincent listened to every word and watched Paul's face while he spoke, and saw the complete professionalism of a man who had separated the doing from the feeling for so long that he could perform one while experiencing the other without any external evidence of the gap. When Paul hung up, Vincent said, "Give me your phone." Paul handed it over. "Roman is going to drive you somewhere. You're going to stay there until I tell you otherwise. You're not going to contact Franklin, Derek, Tillman, or anyone connected to any of this. You're not going to contact your wife except to tell her you're fine and working." He paused. "If you do any of those things, the conversation we just had is the last one we have." Paul stood up. He picked up his keys out of habit and then set them back down on the table when he understood that he would not be driving himself anywhere. "My family is not part of this," he said. "They never were," Vincent said. "That's still true. Keep it that way." After Roman came back and took Paul out, Vincent sat alone in the Fairmount house with the particular devastation of a plan that had been thorough and careful and had still been penetrated at its core. The investigation Carver had built was known to the other side. The federal strategy was compromised. The warehouse locations were burned. Derek would be moving people within hours, maybe was already moving them, loading women into vans and relocating to addresses that Carver hadn't traced yet and might not be able to trace before they were empty. 31. Minimum. Being moved right now through a city that didn't know they existed. His phone buzzed. Roman. "Locust Street unit clear. Moving the girl to the backup location now. She's okay." He read the message twice. Then he called Frank Caruso. Frank picked up on the second ring, which meant he hadn't been sleeping. "I heard," Frank said before Vincent could speak. "Roman called me." Paul. "Yeah." Frank was quiet for a moment. "How bad?" He gave them everything from the meeting, the warehouses, Carver's name, the federal angle. Vincent paused. "They've had 12 hours to move people." Frank exhaled. "The women." "Yeah. What do you need?" "I need Carver's backup contact list, the one that doesn't go through Paul's network. And I need you to call Martinez." Detective Eliza Martinez, Federal Task Force, someone Frank had cultivated a back-channel relationship with for 6 years, kept in reserve for situations precisely like this one, the kind of contact that existed outside the normal organizational chart. Not through channels, directly. "Tell her I have documentary evidence of an active trafficking operation, and I need a container. Something that can receive evidence and move on it within 12 hours without going through the standard intake process." Frank was quiet. "You're going federal without finishing the Holloway takedown." I don't have time to finish it properly, Vincent said. They're moving the locations right now. If I wait to build the clean case, the women are gone, relocated somewhere I can't trace. If you give Martinez what you have now, it's incomplete. Derek walks on the trafficking charges and comes after you on the... I know, Vincent said. I know what it costs. Frank understood. He had always understood the complete shape of what Vincent was saying, which was one of the reasons Vincent was calling him at 3 in the morning instead of waiting until he could sleep. And the other thing, Frank said carefully. Which other thing? The thing you haven't said out loud yet. Frank's voice was steady and old and patient. The reason the plan breaking down doesn't just mean Derek Holloway gets loose on a technicality. Vincent looked at the wall of the Fairmount house, at the empty table, at Paul Sheridan's keys still sitting where he'd left them. If Derek has had 12 hours, Vincent said slowly, and he knows I'm coming, and he knows I have the girl. His phone buzzed in his hand, an unknown number. He almost didn't answer it. He answered it. The voice on the other end was Derek Holloway's. It was not the easy voice, not the smile he'd heard at the bar at Eclipse. It was flatter and tighter and more honest than Derek had ever allowed himself to be in Vincent's presence, which meant the mask was off, which meant Derek had decided they were past the point where the mask served any purpose. You found the girl, Derek said. Congratulations. She's been very useful. A pause that was calculated and deliberate. Past tense. Vincent said nothing. His hand on the phone was completely still. I know where she is, Derek said. I've known for about 2 hours. I want you to think about that for a second. 2 hours, and she's still fine. Another pause. Because I want to talk to you. You and me. Not your people, not the federal play Frank Caruso is setting up right now. The name landed like a strike, flat and precise, demonstrating the depth of access. You. What do you want? Vincent said. I want you to understand something, Derek said. The broker. The man above me that your girl described to you. The man with the scar and the gray beard. A pause. He has people in every layer of your organization. Not just Paul, not just me. His voice was almost gentle now, which was worse than the flatness. You have been operating inside a structure you didn't build for a very long time, Vincent. You thought it was yours. It was never entirely yours. The Fairmount house was very quiet. There's a meeting you need to take, Derek said. Tonight. He wants to speak to you directly. A pause. He says to tell you he's been waiting for you to find the girl, that this is the conversation he always intended to have. He just needed you to know enough first to understand what he's offering. Vincent looked at Paul Sheridan's keys on the table. If I don't come, he said, then the question of where Avery Quinn is becomes academic, Derek said, and everything you've built gets disassembled in a way that makes tonight look manageable. A final pause. He's not your enemy, Vincent. He never has been. That's what he wants you to hear, in person. The line went dead. Vincent sat in the silence of the Fairmount house and felt, for the first time in a very long time, the specific vertigo of a man who had believed he understood the dimensions of the room he was standing in and had just discovered that the room was significantly larger than he'd been able to see, with walls that extended beyond his sight in directions he hadn't thought to look, and that somewhere in the dark beyond those walls, something had been watching him move through the space he'd believed was his, for long enough to know every pattern, every response, every person he would call, and every decision he would make under pressure, and had built a situation that used all of it against him. He thought about Frank Caruso's name in Derek's mouth. He picked up his phone and called Roman. The backup location, he said. Is it clean, completely clean? Nothing that traces through Paul, through Marcus Tillman, through anyone who's been in a room with me in the last 72 hours. Roman said, yes. Then I need you to do something, and I need you to do it without telling anyone, including Frank, until it's done. He paused. Move Avery again. Different building, different part of the city. Use your own money for the location. Nothing from the organizational accounts. Tell no one the address except me. A beat of silence from Roman, the particular beat of a man who trusted completely and was still processing the scope of what he was being asked to process. Okay, Roman said. And Roman, Vincent paused. The meeting I'm about to take. If I don't call you by 6 in the morning, I know what to do, Roman said. After he hung up, Vincent Moreau sat alone in the Fairmount house for 3 minutes, doing nothing except breathing and thinking and accepting, with the full weight of a man who had spent 23 years believing he was the most dangerous thing in his own city. The possibility that he had been wrong about that for a very... The address Derek gave him was a building on the waterfront south of Penn's Landing, a converted industrial space that had been partially redeveloped in the early 2000s and then abandoned when the financing collapsed, leaving behind a structure that was neither warehouse nor office, but something in between, with new windows installed above old loading bays and a lobby that had been drywalled and carpeted and then left empty for a decade. Vincent knew the building. He had looked at it once as a potential property acquisition and passed on it because the structural assessments were incomplete and the ownership history was tangled in a way that suggested someone was deliberately maintaining the tangle. He understood now why someone had maintained it. He drove there alone, which Roman had argued against in the 3 minutes Roman had allowed himself for argument before accepting that the argument was over. He drove without a weapon, because showing up armed to a meeting called by someone who already had leverage was a gesture rather than a strategy, and Vincent had no patience for gestures tonight. He drove with his phone in his jacket pocket and a second phone, a burner Roman had handed him through the car window, in his inside breast pocket, with Roman's number the only entry and a single instruction. If the call connected and went to silence, Roman would know what the silence meant. The building's lobby door was unlocked. Inside, a man Vincent didn't recognize was standing in the empty carpet and drywall space with his hands visible, which was a deliberate display of non-aggression that paradoxically communicated the opposite. Only people who were very confident they didn't need weapons kept their hands visible. He was younger than Vincent expected, maybe 30, with the build of someone who moved for a living and the face of someone who had been trained not to have a readable face. "Phone," the man said. Vincent gave him the jacket phone. The man looked at it, turned it over, handed it back. He didn't ask for the burner, which meant either he didn't know about it or he'd been told to let it pass, and Vincent didn't know which of those possibilities was worse. The man led him through a door in the back wall and down a corridor that still smelled of construction dust and up a flight of stairs to a room on the second floor where the windows had been covered with blackout material and a set of work lights on stands created the specific harsh illumination of a space that was used for function rather than comfort. Thomas Hargrove was sitting in a chair in the center of the room, mid-50s, heavy through the chest, gray in the beard but not the hair, a scar on his left forearm that was visible because his sleeves were rolled to the elbow in a gesture that was either casual or deliberate. And with this man, Vincent suspected there was no difference. He looked exactly as Avery had described him, down to the scar, down to the sleeve. Vincent stood in the doorway for a moment and took the room's dimensions without appearing to take them. 2 other men along the far wall, positioned with the professional discretion of security, who understood their role was deterrence rather than decoration. Derek Holloway standing to the left of Hargrove's chair, not sitting, which told Vincent something about the actual hierarchy in this room. Derek did not sit in Thomas Hargrove's presence. "Vincent Moreau," Hargrove said. He said it the way you say a name you've been using in private for a long time and are finally using out loud. "Sit down." Vincent sat in the chair across from him. The chairs faced each other with maybe 6 feet between them and the work lights above, making everything flat and overlit and slightly unreal, the way interrogation rooms looked in photographs. Derek was watching Vincent with the focused attention of a man who had spent 3 days being afraid and was now in a room where someone else was supposed to manage that fear for him. "You know my name," Hargrove said. It was not a question. "The girl described you," Vincent said. "Yes." Hargrove seemed unsurprised by this. "She's thorough. I've always thought so." He said it with the detached appreciation of a man commenting on the quality of a tool. "I understand you've been protecting her." "I have." "Why?" The same question Avery had asked him. Vincent gave a different version of the same honest answer. "Because what you're running happened inside my city and under my watch, and that's on me." Hargrove looked at him for a moment with the evaluative attention of a man taking a measurement. "That's a moral position," he said. "I wasn't expecting a moral position." "What were you expecting?" "Territory, business, the standard calculus." Hargrove leaned back slightly. "The moral position is more complicated for me. I can work with territory. I understand territory. Then you understand why we're past the point of working with each other, Vincent said. 2 people are dead. The security guard was 23 years old. Derek made decisions I didn't sanction, Hargrove said. He said it flatly, without apology, as a factual clarification. He didn't look at Derek when he said it, which was its own communication about the current state of Derek Holloway's standing in this room. Derek's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I'm not interested in the internal accounting, Vincent said. I'm here because you said you had something to offer. Say it. Hargrove looked at him steadily. The operation goes deeper than what your investigator found. Much deeper. 17 cities, not just Philadelphia. He let that land. The financial structure Paul Sheridan helped clean, that's one branch. There are 11 other branches with 11 other people performing the same function in 11 other cities. Vincent kept his face still. I'm not telling you this to impress you, Hargrove said. I'm telling you because the federal investigation your associate Frank Caruso is setting up tonight will catch the Philadelphia branch and nothing else. The other 11 branches will collapse inward, go dark, and rebuild somewhere else within 6 months. He paused. Unless someone gives the federal people the complete architecture, all 17 cities, all 11 financial operators, every name, every account, every location. And you're offering to do that, Vincent said. I'm offering to give you everything, Hargrove said. Names, locations, financial records, operational documentation going back 8 years. Enough to take down every branch simultaneously. Enough to make it permanent. He paused. In exchange for 2 things. The room was very quiet. My name stays out of the federal filing, Hargrove said. Complete immunity on my participation. I become a protected witness with a new identity, and I disappear. He said it with the pragmatic specificity of a man who had been planning this conversation for some time. And Derek takes the full weight. Everything, his idea, his operation, his decisions. I was a financial consultant who didn't ask enough questions. Vincent looked at Derek. Derek's face had gone the color of old concrete. He understood, in this moment, what the last 3 days had actually been. Not a defense of his operation, not a power play with Vincent, but a managed performance designed to bring Vincent to this chair at this moment so that Thomas Hargrove could make this offer. Derek had not been protecting himself. He had been delivering himself, wrapped and presented, to be the sacrifice that bought Hargrove his exit. You built this, Derek said. His voice cracked slightly on the second word. You built all of it. I was 23 when you... Derek. Hargrove didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Be quiet. Derek was quiet. The silence of a man who had just understood the full geometry of the trap he'd been living inside. Vincent watched this and felt something cold and specific move through him. Not sympathy for Derek, not satisfaction at the exposure, but the recognition of the architecture of what Hargrove had built. Not just the trafficking network, the whole structure of it, the way he'd used Derek as the public face, Paul as the financial infrastructure, Tillman as the logistical backbone. The way he'd embedded those people in Vincent's own organization so that the investigation, when it came, would be tangled in Vincent's world and manageable from Hargrove's position outside it. The women, Vincent said. Hargrove waited. In the locations Derek was moving tonight, Vincent said. Where are they now? That depends on whether we have an agreement, Hargrove said. And there it was. The actual leverage. Not Avery's location. Roman had moved her. That line was closed. Not the threat to Vincent's organization. That was a slow burn, manageable. The leverage was 31 women being relocated through a city at 3 a.m. to addresses Vincent couldn't find without Hargrove's cooperation. Vincent looked at the scar on Hargrove's forearm. He thought about Avery describing it, the specific noticing of it, the detail retained from a room full of things to be afraid of. He thought about what it meant that a 55-year-old man with a scar on his arm and gray in his beard had built a 17-city operation and was now sitting across from him offering a clean exit with the calm of someone who had already decided how this ended. I want addresses, Vincent said. Tonight. Before I agree to anything, I want the locations where Derek moved people in the last 12 hours. After we agree? Before. Vincent's voice was completely flat. You're asking me to trust that the information exists and that it's complete. I'm asking for proof of concept. One location, verifiable, tonight. Hargrove studied him. The evaluation was long and specific, and Vincent held it without moving. One location, Hargrove said finally. He gave an address on the southwest side. a warehouse near the naval yard that wasn't in Carver's files. Vincent texted it to Roman without taking the phone out, his thumb moving by memory on the burner in his breast pocket. "Now," Vincent said, "the immunity arrangement. You're asking me to tell Detective Martinez that you don't exist. I'm asking you to omit me from the information you provide," Hargrove said. "Yes. And if I don't, then I burn everything," Hargrove said. "The documentation, the financial records, every piece of evidence that connects the other 11 branches. It goes into incinerators in 6 cities simultaneously, right now on my instruction. The Philadelphia case collapses without the full picture, and Derek's lawyers have him out in 18 months. He paused. "And the women you're so concerned about spend those 18 months in locations you'll never find." Vincent breathed, in and out, slow enough that it didn't show. The burner phone in his breast pocket vibrated once. Roman's confirmation pulse. The address checked out. Active. People inside. "I need 10 minutes, Vincent said. "You have 5, Hargrove said. Vincent stood up and walked to the far end of the room. Not far enough for privacy. There was no privacy in this room, but far enough for the performance of thought, which was what he needed Hargrove to see. He stood with his back partially to the room and his eyes on the blacked-out window, and he thought as fast as he had ever thought about anything. The offer was structured to be irresistible. Complete evidence against Derek. 17 cities worth of documentation. The women in the current locations freed. All of it in exchange for a man who had built the whole architecture walking away clean. The offer was also a trap. Not in the obvious sense. Hargrove almost certainly intended to deliver what he promised, because a man this careful didn't maintain leverage by failing to deliver. The trap was in the precedent, in what it meant for Vincent to be the person who made this deal, in what he became by accepting it. He thought about Avery Quinn telling him to stop waiting. He thought about 31, the number she'd counted. He thought about 17 cities, and the women in those 17 cities who were not Avery, who had not found an improperly secured window, who were still inside the structure right now waiting for someone to decide their value against someone else's immunity. He turned around. "No," he said. The room shifted. Not dramatically. Hargrove's face didn't move. But the 2 men along the far wall did something with their posture, and Derek Holloway took a short breath, and Vincent registered all of it and stayed standing where he was. "No," Vincent said again, in case the word needed reinforcing. "I'm not omitting you. I'm not telling Martinez you don't exist. You exist. You built this. You sit in the federal filing with your name on it, and you give the documentation as a cooperating witness, and you negotiate your sentence through the proper process." Hargrove looked at him for a long moment. "You understand what I said about the evidence." "I heard you. 6 cities. Everything burns in the next 20 minutes if I make one call." "Then make it," Vincent said, "and I'll build the case from the ground up without your documentation, and it'll take longer and it'll be incomplete, and some people in the other 11 cities will slip through, and I'll spend the next 3 years closing those gaps one at a time." He paused. "But your name will be on every piece of it, every city, every victim. I'll spend whatever it costs to make sure the federal filing has your complete biography attached to it." He watched Hargrove's face, watched the calculation moving behind the stillness. "The women in the southwest location," Vincent said. "Roman's team is outside right now. They're going in regardless of what you decide in this room. The women in that building are coming out tonight." He paused. "Your choice is whether the other locations come with them or not." "You're giving up your leverage," Hargrove said. "I never had leverage," Vincent said. "I came here without a weapon. You have 2 men on the wall, and you have Derek, and you have 17 cities of documentation. You have all the leverage." He looked at Hargrove steadily. "But you called this meeting because you want out, not because you're afraid of me, because you're afraid of the people above you, the ones who built the 17 cities and would burn them down with you inside before they'd let you surface." He watched Hargrove's face. "I don't know their names yet, but I will. And when I do, they'll know your name too, unless you're out before I find them." The silence in the room had a different texture now. Hargrove's stillness was the same, that controlled, practiced flatness, but something behind it had shifted in a way Vincent could feel rather than see. "How long have you known?" Hargrove said, very quietly. 20 minutes, Vincent said. The offer was too clean. Men who are confident in their leverage don't offer this much. "You're not running from me. You're running from your own structure." He paused. How long before they decide you're a liability? Hargrove said nothing, which was its own answer. Derek spoke from the corner of the room, his voice stripped of everything except the specific exhaustion of a man who had been a pawn for long enough to be tired of it. He's been moving money away from them for 8 months, Derek said. Building his exit. They found out 2 weeks ago. Hargrove looked at Derek with an expression that was not anger. It was beyond anger, in the territory where anger becomes something quieter and more permanent. Shut your mouth, Hargrove said. Why? Derek said. You were going to give me to them anyway. Derek, Vincent's voice cut across the room and both men looked at him. Sit down and don't say another word. He said it not with authority over Derek, but with the pragmatic force of a man managing a situation that was about to accelerate past the point of management. Derek sat. Vincent looked at Hargrove. You have maybe 72 hours before the people above you move on you. Maybe less. Cooperating witness is the only structure that gives you any protection. He paused. Not immunity, not a new name somewhere warm, but alive and in federal custody is better than the alternative, and you know that better than I do. Hargrove sat very still for a long time. Bull. One of the men along the far wall shifted slightly, and Hargrove held up 2 fingers without looking at him, and the man went still again. The documentation, Hargrove said finally. If I give it to your federal contact, everything, all 17 cities, I need a guarantee of protective custody from the moment I walk out of this room. I can get you a phone call to Martinez in the next 10 minutes, Vincent said. She can have federal marshals at a location of her choosing within an hour. That's the best I can do, and it's better than what you had 20 minutes ago. Hargrove looked at him. He looked at Derek. He looked at the 2 men on the wall who were his security and who were, in the current geometry of the situation, irrelevant. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket. Vincent didn't move. Hargrove produced a small drive. Thumb drive, black casing, the kind you bought in bulk. He set it on the floor between the 2 chairs. Partial documentation, he said. Enough for Martinez to verify the scope before I give her the full archive. He looked up. Make the call. Vincent took out the jacket phone, chokes. Not the burner, the real phone, the one the man at the door had looked at and handed back, and dialed Frank Caruso. Frank picked up on the first ring. I'm with Martinez, Frank said immediately, which meant Frank had been 2 steps ahead of this, which meant Frank was still the person Vincent trusted most in the world. She's ready. Tell her I have a cooperating witness, Hargrove Thomas. He'll give her full documentation on a 17-city operation in exchange for protective custody. She needs marshals at... He looked at Hargrove. The Marriott on Market, Hargrove said. Room 714. Vincent relayed it. 20 minutes, Frank said, and the line clicked. Vincent put the phone in his pocket and looked at Thomas Hargrove sitting in the work light in the converted warehouse and thought about the specific nature of the deal that had just been struck. Not clean, not satisfying, carrying costs that would be counted for years, but functional, moving. The other locations, Vincent said. Derek moved people to at least 3 addresses tonight. I need them. Hargrove looked at Derek. Derek's face was the face of a man with nothing left to protect. He gave 3 addresses. His voice was flat and factual and completely without resistance, the voice of a man who had run out of all the things that made resistance feel worthwhile. Vincent texted all 3 to Roman. He stood up. He picked up the thumb drive from the floor. The men on the wall, he said to Hargrove, they stay here until the marshals confirm your custody. Then they walk away and this room didn't exist. Hargrove nodded. Vincent walked toward the door. He was 3 steps from it when Derek Holloway said, Moreau. Vincent stopped but didn't turn. I was 23, Derek said. When he came to me, I didn't... He stopped. It doesn't matter. No, Vincent said. It doesn't. He walked out. Down the stairs, through the dusty lobby, out the building's front door into the August night where the river smell hit him immediately. That particular Philadelphia waterfront mixture of industry and water, and something old underneath both. He stood on the sidewalk and took 3 breaths. His phone was already going. Roman's number, incoming. Southwest location is clear, Roman said. His voice had the specific controlled flatness of a man who had seen something and was working to stay operational around what he'd seen. 11 women. We're moving them now. Vincent? A pause. They're in bad shape. Get medical. Use the Haverford contact, not the normal channel. Vincent was already walking to his car. The other 3 addresses I sent. How fast can you move? Mateo and the East team are en route to the first one now. 20 minutes. Go. What about you? I'm going to see Avery, Vincent said. He drove across the city with all 4 windows down and the night air moving through the car. He drove through streets that were quieting toward the specific hour when Philadelphia went almost but never entirely still. That narrow window between the last bars closing and the first deliveries arriving when the city ran on minimum staff and maximum shadow. He drove without music and without calls and let the city move past him and thought about nothing specific and everything at once in the particular way of a man whose mind was too full to organize and had stopped trying. The backup location Roman had chosen was a building in Fairmount, different from the house, an apartment building, 3rd floor, the kind of anonymous brick structure that held its residents privately. Roman's car was parked outside. Mateo was in the lobby, visible through the glass, and he buzzed Vincent through without speaking. 3rd floor, end of the hall. Vincent knocked twice. Avery opened the door. She was dressed and awake, which told him she hadn't slept. She looked at his face and did the thing she always did. The rapid assessment, the cataloging of information, the read completed in 3 seconds. It's over, she said. Not yet, he said, but the structure's exposed, federal custody in the next hour. The locations Derek moved people to tonight, we're clearing them now. She stood back and let him in. The apartment was spare, just the furniture Roman had arranged, a couch, a table, a lamp. She sat on the couch and he stayed standing near the window, too wired to sit. How many? She said. 11 in the first location. 3 more addresses being cleared now. She put her hand over her mouth, not from shock, from the specific physical response of a body that had been holding something back for a very long time and had just been given permission by one specific number to stop holding it. She held the expression for 3 seconds, and then it was gone, replaced by the familiar controlled stillness, but those 3 seconds were as unguarded as he had ever seen her. The man above Derek, she said. The broker. In federal custody within the hour. And Derek. Same. She looked at the window. It's not finished, she said. You said not yet. Hargrove said there are people above him. The structure goes up further than him. He paused. We don't have those names yet. She absorbed this. Are they coming after me? Not tonight. Hargrove's cooperation changes the geometry. They'll be pulling inward, protecting themselves, not extending reach. He paused. But until the full structure is mapped and the federal case is filed, I'm not going to tell you you're completely safe. She nodded. It was the nod she'd given him before. Compact. Decided. The gesture of someone who worked with accurate information rather than comfort. There's something else, he said. She looked at him. Paul Sheridan gave them your location here, he said. Not before Roman moved you. He gave them Locust Street before I found out about his connection. He didn't know this address. He paused. But you should know that someone in my circle did that. The silence that followed was a specific kind. Not hurt, not betrayal. She had no investment in Paul Sheridan's integrity. It was the silence of a person recalibrating risk from a direction they'd allowed themselves to stop watching. The people above Hargrove, she said. If they still have people in your organization, I'm running that down, he said. Tonight, after this. Vincent? She said his name the same way she'd said it at Locust Street. Flatly, directly, with the weight of someone who had decided to stop being careful with language because careful language was a luxury, and they were past the point of it. How many people in your circle don't you know about? It was the most precise question anyone had asked him in 3 days, and it landed with the specific force of precision, not attacking, not accusing, just pointing at the exact thing he had been avoiding pointing at himself. He looked at her. I don't know, he said. It was the second most honest thing he had said in this building, and something in her expression shifted the same way it had before, that specific acknowledgement of truth over utility. His phone buzzed. Roman. Second location clear. 9 women. 3rd address en route. He showed her the message. She read it and looked up, and her eyes were doing something he hadn't seen them do before. Not scanning, not cataloging, not watching exits. Just present. In this room, in this moment, for 3 seconds before the habit reasserted and the watching returned. "Go," she said. "Do what you need to do." He nodded. He was at the door when she said, "The people above Hargrove, when you find their names." She paused. "Tell me." He looked back at her. "I want to know it's finished," she said. "All the way." "I'll tell you," he said. He left. In the lobby, Matteo was still at the post, and outside Roman's car was still at the curb, and the city was running its 3 a.m. minimum staff maximum shadow operation around all of it, indifferent and continuous. Vincent sat in his car and looked at the building's entrance and thought about 17 cities and the names he didn't have yet, and the structure that continued upward past Thomas Hargrove into regions of the operation he hadn't mapped. He thought about Paul Sheridan's keys on the Fairmount table. He thought about the fraction of a second pause in Paul's expression when he'd walked into that room. He thought about Avery's question. "How many people in your circle don't you know about?" His phone rang. Frank Caruso. He answered. "Martinez has Hargrove," Frank said. "Marshals are with him. She's looked at the drive, so—" "Vincent, the scope of this thing." Frank paused, which was unusual for him. "She says the documentation covers operations in 8 countries, not 17 cities. 8 countries. Vincent closed his eyes for 1 second. "She wants to meet with you," Frank said. "Tonight. She says the Philadelphia case is the entry point, but the federal investigation she's going to open is—" He paused again. "She said to tell you that what you've handed her is the biggest thing her division has seen in 20 years, and she needs you to be a cooperative participant in what comes next." "Define cooperative participant," Vincent said. "She'll define it herself when you meet her." A pause. "She also said—" Frank stopped. "Frank?" "She said the names above Hargrove. She has 2 of them already from the documentation. One of them is a sitting federal judge in the Eastern District." Another pause. "The other one is connected to the city council." Vincent sat very still. "This doesn't end tonight," Frank said. "No," Vincent said. "It might not end for a long time." "I know." "Are you still sure?" Frank said. Vincent looked at the building where Avery Quinn was sitting on a couch in a spare apartment on the 3rd floor, awake and watchful and alive, counting the women coming out of warehouse addresses on the southwest side of a city that hadn't known they were there. "Set up the meeting," he said. He sat back in his seat. Outside, Philadelphia moved through its narrow, quiet hour, and the river was somewhere south of them carrying its usual cargo of dark water and city silence, and in federal custody on Market Street, a man with a scar on his arm was beginning to dismantle in words the structure it had taken him 8 years to build. And somewhere in the upper layers of that structure, men with clean names and public positions were asleep in their beds, not yet knowing that the thread had been found and the pull. The meeting with Detective Eliza Martinez happened at 4:40 in the morning in a conference room on the 6th floor of a building on Chestnut Street that had no signage on the exterior and a lobby that looked like a mid-tier insurance office and functioned as something else entirely. Frank Caruso had been there for 20 minutes when Vincent arrived, sitting in a chair along the wall with a paper cup of coffee and the expression of a man who had been awake too long and had stopped pretending otherwise. Martinez was younger than Vincent had expected, early 40s, with the particular quality of tired that came not from one long night, but from the accumulated weight of work that never fully concluded. She had dark hair pulled back without ceremony and wore a jacket over a shirt she'd clearly thrown on in a hurry, and she looked at Vincent when he came through the door with the direct evaluative attention of someone who had been waiting to take the measure of him for some time. She did not thank him for coming. He appreciated that. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She put 3 photographs on the table. Federal Judge Alan Whitmore of the Eastern District, City Councilman Raymond Cross. A third face he didn't recognize, a woman, 60s, silver-haired, with the composed expression of institutional authority. "Catherine Bryce," Martinez said, "General Counsel for a private equity firm with offices in 6 of the 8 countries Hargrove documented. She's the financial architecture above Hargrove. He built the operational side. She built the money side." She paused. "Hargrove's documentation on her is comprehensive. He kept records on everyone above him, which is why the people above him decided he was a liability." "How long have you had Whitmore and Cross?" Vincent said. "Whitmore we've suspected for 14 months. Nothing actionable until tonight." She paused. "Cross came from the documentation on the drive. We didn't have him at all." She looked at Vincent steadily. This is what I need you to understand about what you've given us. The federal case we're going to build is going to take time, serious time. These aren't street operators. They have lawyers and resources and institutional cover, and they will fight every piece of evidence through every available process. She paused. It could be 18 months before the first trial, longer before the last one. And in the interim, Vincent said, in the interim, Hargrove is in protective custody providing ongoing cooperation. Derek Holloway is in custody pending arraignment on charges that will be amended as the federal case develops. Whitmore and Cross will be arrested within 48 hours pending grand jury action. She paused. And Catherine Bryce is in her apartment on the Upper East Side in New York, which means she's outside my jurisdiction for the next several hours while I coordinate with the Southern District. Will she run? My counterpart in New York has eyes on her building, Martinez said. She doesn't know the documentation exists yet. As of right now, she believes the Philadelphia operation is a manageable exposure and that Hargrove is either dead or running. She paused. She'll know differently in the next few hours. Vincent looked at the photographs on the table. He looked at the specific faces of people who had built a structure inside the architecture of legitimate power. A judge, a politician, a lawyer, and used that architecture to make 31 women, at minimum in one city alone, disappear into the logic of inventory. The victims, he said, the women being cleared from the locations tonight. What happens to them? Federal victim services, trauma counseling, legal assistance for anyone without documentation. Martinez's voice was level. It's not perfect. The system is underfunded and overtaxed, and some of them are going to fall through gaps we can't close. But the operation is exposed, the locations are being documented as crime scenes, and every woman who can provide testimony will have federal protection while she does it. She said it without prettying it up, which he also appreciated. There's a specific victim, Vincent said. The one who started this. I want her status to be handled carefully. No press exposure, no public testimony requirements unless she chooses them. Her name has been changed, the name she's currently using. I want that name protected in the federal filing. Martinez looked at him. That's a request I can consider, she said. Not a guarantee I can make right now. Consider it seriously, he said. She held his gaze for a moment, and then nodded, once, with the particular specificity of a person who was noting something for subsequent action rather than making a promise they couldn't keep. Frank Caruso spoke from his chair along the wall. There's the other matter, he said. Vincent looked at him. Paul Sheridan, Frank said, and he said the name with the particular weight of a man who had known Paul Sheridan for 15 years and was setting that weight down on the table because carrying it further served no purpose. He cooperated when Vincent asked him to make the call to Derek. He provided information on his role and the payments. He's been held voluntarily. Frank paused. He has a family. I'm aware of Paul Sheridan, Martinez said, and the way she said it told Vincent she had more than awareness, so she had documentation, which meant the financial trail Carver had pulled was comprehensive enough for the federal side to have already incorporated it. He'll be charged. The cooperation will be considered at sentencing, which is the legal process for that kind of thing, and the most I can promise. Frank nodded. He looked at the table. He looked like a man accepting an answer he'd known was coming. The meeting ran until 6 a.m, covering operational details and evidence chain and coordination logistics that Vincent would never discuss in any other context, and that Martinez handled with the precision of someone who had been waiting for this particular package of information for longer than he'd known. By the time it was done, the quality of dark outside the window had shifted to the particular gray of early morning that wasn't yet light, but was no longer night. He drove back through the city as it started coming awake around him. The early delivery trucks, the first shift workers at the bus stops, the gradual reopening of a city that had run on minimum overnight and was starting to recalibrate toward the day's full weight. He did not go to Eclipse. He drove to the Locust Street unit, the one that was burned, that Derek's people had known about, and parked outside it and sat. He didn't go in. He just sat and looked at the building's unremarkable facade and thought about Avery Quinn sitting on the supply room floor behind the cleaning products with her arms around her knees, and the way she'd said, "I'm sorry," before anyone had asked for an apology. He thought about the education required to produce that reflex. He thought about Carlos Peña in the Schuylkill River, 23 years old. He thought about Tommy Weiss, whose body had been found in a parking structure off Broad Street at 5:15 that morning, according to a text from Roman that he hadn't yet replied to. He thought about 11 women in the Southwest warehouse and 9 in the second location, and what Roman had meant when he'd said they're in bad shape, in the specific controlled voice of a man managing what he'd seen. He thought about 31. He thought about 17 cities. He thought about 8 countries, and Catherine Bryce in her apartment on the Upper East Side, currently unaware. He thought about the fraction of a second pause in Paul Sheridan's face. He thought about Derek Holloway at 23, which was a thought he did not want and did not entirely dismiss. He didn't dismiss it because dismissing it was easier than holding it, and the easy version of this night was not the version that would allow him to live with what he'd done in it. The sun came up over the city. Not dramatically. Philadelphia's summer sunrises were not dramatic. They were gradual and humid and smelled like the previous day's heat already reasserting itself. It came up while he was sitting in the car and turned the gray to amber to the particular flat gold of an August morning that was going to be hot by 9. He started the car and drove to the backup building in Fairmount. Roman's car was still outside. Mateo was gone from the lobby, replaced by a man Vincent recognized from the East team, and the man let him through without words. 3rd floor, end of the hall. He knocked twice. No answer. He knocked again. A sound from inside. Not alarm, just the specific sound of movement that had been still. Then Avery's voice. "Roman?" "No," he said. A pause. Then the bolt. She had slept. He could see it in the quality of her face when she opened the door. Not refreshed, not rested in any comfortable sense, but the specific blankness of someone who had gone down hard into sleep out of sheer biological necessity and come back up still carrying everything they'd gone down with. She was wearing the same clothes. Her hair had come partially out of the tie she'd had it in, and she'd pushed it back without fixing it. She looked at his face and read it the way she always read it, fast and complete. "It's done," she said. "For tonight," he said. "The larger case will run for a long time, but the operation is exposed. Hargrove is in custody. The locations are cleared." She stood back from the door. He came in and sat in one of the chairs at the table, and she sat across from him, and for a moment neither of them said anything, which was not uncomfortable. It had the quality of a silence between people who had been through something together and were on the other side of it, and were allowing the other side to be what it was, which was not triumph and not relief, but something more complicated than either. "The women from the locations," she said. "Federal Victim Services, it's not seamless, but they're out." She looked at the table. Her hands were flat on the surface in front of her, palms down, not gripping anything. "How many total?" 27 confirmed from 3 locations. The 4th address was already cleared when Roman's team arrived. Derek had moved those women before we had the address. He paused. "Martinez's people are tracking where they went. It's in the federal investigation now. 4 women unaccounted for." He watched her do the arithmetic. He watched her hold it. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him. Her eyes were doing the thing they'd done for 2 seconds the night before. Present, unguarded, but this time it held longer before the habit moved back in. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Tell me. The way this ends for me, the federal cooperation, the investigation I'm now part of, it changes what my organization looks like going forward." He paused, choosing the words with the care they required. "Martinez is not my partner. She's a federal officer who has leverage over me now, as well as obligation to me. The relationship is functional, not clean." He paused. "What I'm saying is that the version of me who offered you a transaction, a room on Locust Street and 3 shifts a week, and nobody bothering you, that was a simpler version of a situation that isn't simple anymore." She looked at him steadily. "Are you telling me you can't protect me?" "I'm telling you that the protection I can offer is more complicated now than it was a week ago, and you deserve to know what you're inside of." He paused. "If you want Martinez's victim services, I'll facilitate that directly. Federal protection, a completely separate track from anything connected to me. It's legitimate and it's safer in certain specific ways." She was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the window where the morning light was coming through at a low angle and putting a stripe of gold across the table between them. "When I was in the second location," she said, "there was a woman named Daria. She was there when I arrived and she was there when I left. She spoke Romanian and a little English, and she had a daughter, she said, 7 years old, back home. She paused. I don't know if Daria was in one of the locations you cleared tonight. I can find out, he said. I know you can. She looked back at him. That's why I'm still here. Not because I don't know the difference between your world and the federal system. I know the difference. She paused. But the federal system didn't come looking for me. You did. And the difference between those two things is... She stopped. She looked for the word and didn't find the right one and settled for a gesture, a slight open motion of one hand that communicated the rest without language. He understood it. The Locust Street unit is compromised, he said, but I have another property on Pine Street, 2-bedroom, second floor. It's registered under a corporate entity that has no connection to anything from this week. You can stay there until you have what you need for something of your own. He paused. Same transaction as before. You work when you want to work. You pay what you can. You leave when you're ready. And you find out about Daria, she said. I'll find out about Daria. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. He spent the next 3 weeks in the most concentrated, sustained work of his professional life. And it was work of a kind he had never done. Not building, not defending, not managing the controlled violence of an organization that ran on fear and loyalty, but dismantling, pulling apart, identifying every strand of connection between his organization and the Holloway network that Paul Sheridan had built over 2 years of monthly payments and operational overlap, and cutting each strand with the same thoroughness he had applied to building the whole thing in the first place. Paul Sheridan was indicted on federal charges on the 14th day. Vincent had a conversation with him before the arraignment, not at the Fairmount House, not anywhere that had a name in his operational vocabulary, but in a parking garage in West Philadelphia where they stood between cars, and Vincent said what needed to be said, and Paul said what needed to be said, and they looked at each other for a moment with the particular quality of attention that 15 years of working together produces, which was not love and was not exactly respect, but was something in that territory, and then it was over. Paul's wife got a call from a lawyer that afternoon about a trust account that had been established in her children's names. Vincent did not acknowledge this to anyone. Catherine Bryce was arrested in New York on the 3rd day. The Southern District filed charges that read, when the public version was released, like the table of contents of something that would take years to fully document. She did not cooperate. Her lawyers were good, and her composure in front of cameras was the composure of someone who had spent 60 years building an armor of institutional credibility and intended to wear it until it was physically stripped from her. It would be stripped. It would take time. Judge Whitmore resigned before he could be arrested. The arrest happened anyway, at his home in Bryn Mawr, at 7 in the morning, and Vincent read about it in the news and felt nothing in particular, which was its own information about the state of his capacity for feeling particular things that month. Councilman Cross cooperated. His cooperation bought him reduced charges and cost him everything else. His seat, his marriage, his name in the specific way a name in public life carries weight, that evaporates the moment the structure beneath it collapses. Vincent thought about Raymond Cross less than he thought about any of the others. Marcus Tillman disappeared for 11 days before Roman found him in a cabin in the Poconos that was registered to his brother-in-law, and he came back to Philadelphia in the custody of federal marshals and gave everything he had to give and was charged with 6 counts of a variety that would keep him occupied in the legal system for the foreseeable future. Daria was one of the women cleared from the second location on the night of the operation. She had a hairline fracture in 2 fingers of her right hand and a Romanian passport that had been confiscated when she'd been taken and which the Federal Victim Services team tracked through a chain of custody that led back to a storage unit in South Philadelphia, connected to one of the 6 names in Carver's original file. The passport was returned to her at the federal intake facility. Her daughter's name was Elena. Avery came to Vincent's office at Eclipse on a Thursday afternoon and told him about Daria when she found out. And she told it without preamble, standing in the doorway before she'd even fully come in, the way you tell someone something you've been carrying since you found it out. He listened. He said he was glad. She said she was too. Then she came in and sat down, and they talked about the Pine Street unit and what she needed for a deposit on her own place and how long it would take at the rate she was saving. And he told her he knew a woman who managed a building on Spruce Street with reasonable rents and flexible terms, and he could make an introduction if she wanted. She wanted. The summer moved into autumn in the gradual way of Philadelphia autumns. which arrived less as a season change and more as a slow renegotiation of terms between the heat and everything else. The trees in Rittenhouse Square went amber, and the air took on the particular sharpness of October, and the city's pace shifted in the specific way it shifted when the summer's oppressive weight finally lifted. The federal trials were in preliminary stages. The news cycle had found the story and then moved past the worst of it to the procedural grind, which was less interesting to report on but more important for the actual outcome. Martinez called Vincent once a week with updates that were operational rather than conversational, and he received them the same way. Frank Caruso had a cardiac event in late September. Not a full heart attack, the doctors were careful to distinguish, but a serious enough event that he spent 4 days in Penn Medicine and came home to his wife's instruction that he was now genuinely retired, not the theoretical retirement of the last 3 years, but actual retirement, and he received this instruction with the particular combination of resistance and relief of a man who had been waiting to be given permission to stop. Vincent visited him at home on the second day and sat in his living room and drank the coffee his wife made, and they talked about nothing important for 90 minutes, which was exactly what was needed. Dominic Reyes took over the organizational duties Frank had still been carrying. Eddie Marsh became the person Vincent talked to most frequently about the rebuilding work. Not reconstruction, because what existed before wasn't what he was rebuilding toward, but something that occupied the same territory with different lines drawn through it. Lines he was still figuring out the placement of. Roman Voss got married in October to a woman he'd been seeing for 3 years, who taught middle school in Germantown, and who made, Vincent thought, the best decision a person in her position could make in loving a man like Roman without asking him to explain himself. Vincent attended the wedding and sat in the third row and watched Roman stand at the front of the room with the particular expression of a man who had spent his adult life prepared for the worst outcome of any situation and was confronting the specific disorientation of a situation where the worst outcome was not available to him. Avery Quinn moved into the building on Spruce Street on a Saturday in mid-October. Vincent helped her carry boxes up 2 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken, which she found funny and said so. And he carried the boxes without comment, and she laughed at his expression, and it was the first time he had heard her laugh, and it sounded like something that had been stored in a locked room for a long time, and was surprised to find the lock gone. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom, a galley kitchen, a window that looked out over a courtyard where someone had planted something that was still vaguely green despite the October cold. She'd acquired furniture through a combination of donation, discount, and 2 items from the Pine Street unit that he'd told her to keep. The whole space was spare in the way her life was currently spare, stripped down to what was functional, with the specific quality of a place that was being inhabited rather than decorated. She had her diploma, a GED she'd finished during the weeks at Pine Street, taking the test on a Tuesday at a center in North Philadelphia and coming back with the paper and putting it on the kitchen table and looking at it for a long time before putting it in a folder. She had a job at an interior architecture firm in Center City. Not as anything impressive, she'd said, just office management, answering phones and managing schedules. But it was work in a building where people treated her as a person and not an instrument. And where she ate lunch at her desk and sometimes talked to the woman at the next desk about inconsequential things and was discovering, slowly, that inconsequential things were not trivial. She was rebuilding the muscles of ordinary life. He could see it when he talked to her, the slow rehabilitation of things that fear had atrophied. The ability to sit in a room without charting every exit. The ability to say, I don't know, without it feeling like a confession of vulnerability. The ability to plan something for next month and mean it. It was not a straight line. She told him once, in the particular tone of voice she used for things that were true but not easy, that there were nights when she woke at 3 a.m. with her heart going at the specific speed it had gone in the room she'd been held in, and that the difference between then and now was not that the waking stopped happening, but that she knew, when she came back to herself, exactly where she was, and that the door had a lock she'd chosen. On a Sunday afternoon in November, she came to Eclipse. She arrived at 3 o'clock when the club was closed, and the afternoon light came through the high windows at an angle that made the empty floor look different from the way it looked at night. Less inhabited, but somehow more itself. The bones of the space visible without the overlay of crowd and music. Marcus Webb was doing inventory at the bar and looked up when she came in and nodded with the particular nod of a person who understood the specific history of this visitor and treated it accordingly. Vincent was in his office. Roman knocked and told him Avery was on the floor, and he came down. She was standing in the middle of the main floor where she'd stood on that first morning in August, and she was looking up at the same upper-level booth where he'd been sitting, and she turned when she heard him on the stairs. She looked different. Not dramatically, not in the way that transformations happen in stories, clean and visible and complete. More the way people look when they've been sleeping properly for a while, when they've been eating enough, when their body has been allowed to return to whatever its default register is without the constant compression of threat, still watchful, still carrying the educated attention that would probably never entirely leave her. But underneath the watchfulness, something that had more room than before. "I wanted to see it in the daylight," she said. "I've only ever been here at night." He stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at her, looking at the room. "How's Spruce Street?" he said. "Cold," she said. "The heat takes a while to come on in the morning." A pause. "I don't mind it." He nodded. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. She looked at him directly in the way she looked at things when she'd decided to look at them rather than around them. "I thought about what you said. The first time I asked why you helped me, and you said you weren't sure you had a good answer." She paused. "I've been thinking about that for 3 months." He waited. "I think the answer is simpler than you made it," she said. "I think you saw something happening that was wrong, and you had the ability to do something about it, and you did. And that the reason you didn't have a clean answer is because it wasn't about you at all." She paused. "Which is probably the most decent thing about it." He looked at her for a moment. "That's a generous interpretation," he said. "It's the accurate one," she said. "I'm not generous. I'm accurate." A slight pause at the edge of her mouth that might have been the beginning of something. "Ask anyone." He looked at the empty floor. The afternoon light was changing as clouds moved outside, the gold going flat and then returning. "You're all right," he said. It was not a question. "I'm working on it," she said. "That's different from all right, but it's the right direction." He nodded. She looked around the room one more time, at the bar, at the high windows, at the booth where he'd been sitting the first morning. She looked at it the way you look at something you're consciously deciding how to file, not as a location of fear or of rescue, but as a place that was simply where a specific thing began. A coordinate, part of the map, but not the territory. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her. "I know you don't like it," she said. "The thank you. You'll probably say something about transactions." A pause. "Say it anyway." "You did the hard part," he said. "Everything after that was logistics." She looked at him with an expression he recognized now, the one that appeared when he said something true instead of something useful. "That's not the same as saying you're welcome," she said. "You're welcome," he said. She picked up the bag she'd set down when she'd crossed the floor. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder and looked at him once more, and he looked at her, and it was one of those moments that had no language adequate to it. Two people standing in the same room that had held them both under very different circumstances, on the other side of something that had cost what it had cost and changed what it had changed, with the clear autumn light coming through the high windows and laying itself across the empty floor between them. "I'll see you around," she said. "Yeah," he said. She walked out through the front entrance. He stood at the bottom of the stairs and heard the door close, and then the particular silence of an empty room reasserting itself. He stood there for a moment. Then he walked back up to his office and sat down at his desk and looked at the city map on the wall with its red markings. Some of them were different now, edges redrawn, territories renegotiated, the careful cartography of his world revised by a month that had redrawn more lines than any before it. He had a call with Martinez at 5, a meeting with Dominic at 7. The organizational accounting from the restructured distribution network would be on his desk tomorrow, and it would require 3 hours of careful attention before he could sign off on any of it. He had a federal case attached to his name that would demand his cooperation for months, possibly years. He had a circle of people who were still being vetted because the question Avery had asked, "How many people don't you know about?" had not been fully answered and might never be fully answered, because that was the nature of the question. He had 2 dead men whose names he would carry, Tommy Weiss, 26, and Carlos Peña, 23. In the specific way he carried certain things, without ceremony, without any outward evidence, just present and accounted for in the ledger he kept that no one else could read. He had a city that kept moving outside his window, indifferent and continuous and generating, in every passing hour, new situations that would eventually require his attention or judgment or intervention, or simply his willingness to look at things directly and without the comfortable softening of looking at an angle. He thought about Avery Quinn walking out the front door of Eclipse in the November light. He thought about what she'd said, "Not about you at all," and sat with the accuracy of it, which was uncomfortable and which he did not look away from. Outside, the city was doing what cities do in November, pulling its coat tighter, moving faster, breathing steam into the cold air, carrying the whole enormous weight of itself forward into the next hour and the hour after that, with the particular and different momentum of a thing that had been moving for a long time and did not require any individual person's willingness to continue. He picked up the phone. He had work to do. The afternoon light shifted and thinned through the high windows of the empty club floor below, and the city kept moving. And somewhere on Spruce Street, a woman with green eyes and a door with a lock she'd chosen sat in a small apartment that was hers and let the November quiet be quiet. And somewhere in a federal facility, a man with a scar on his arm talked and watched his empire translate itself into testimony. And somewhere in the distance, the river moved south through the city the way it always moved, dark and continuous and indifferent to the specific weight of what it had carried, carrying everything forward into the open water. And the day closed around Philadelphia the way days close around cities that do not pause for the scale of what has happened inside them, full of the ordinary noise of people living their ordinary lives in the long aftermath of things they will eventually, slowly, learn to survive.